Hello, my name is Johan Voordouw. I'm an associate professor at Carleton University in Ottawa, Canada. I'd like to thank Architecture, Media, Politics, and Society and the Heritages Conference for the opportunity to share my work. This research remains a work in progress. To start, I'll summarize my abstract. Latent Connections Revealing in Commons is part of a longer-term research creation project entitled Cultural Alignments. Cultural Alignments examines what is in commons between World Heritage Sites. In this paper, I research how sites like the Basque whaling station at Red Bay and the Viking settlement at L'Anse-aux-Meadows is potentially linked in space and time, and to keep history open for renewed interpretation. Canada was a founding member of the United Nations Educational, Scientific, and Cultural Organization, or UNESCO, in 1946, a period when Canada had increased national confidence and internationalization in the immediate post-war period. Since its founding, Canada has inscribed 22 heritage sites onto the World Heritage List. 11 sites are designated natural heritage, 10 sites are cultural heritage, and one is mixed. This paper focuses on two specific sites along the east coast of Canada: L'Anse-aux-Meadows National Historic Site, the first heritage site to be inscribed in 1978, and Red Bay Basque Whaling Station, inscribed some 35 years later. The selection of these two disparate sites aims to understand them across both space and time. The priority of this research is to search for a common thread that might understand them in tandem, simultaneously separate and together. The second aim is to problematize Canada's colonial narratives, which predominantly focus on the English and French at the exclusion of other groups, and therefore other relations. This history stops at the present-day border of so-called Canada, ignoring that at the time many different flows, territories, and peoples interacted across this land and with these places. In the next part, I situate these two sites within the global World Heritage List and larger ethos of what defines contemporary heritage practices. As Christina Cameron writes, the conceptual frameworks underpinning these international instruments are being reevaluated in light of present-day values and perceptions of fairness. Today's holistic approach to heritage conservation makes UNESCO's achievements appear fragmented and only partially effective. Writing about the reinterpretation of the term authenticity, Cameron writes that in 1992 the definition was modified with the addition of the phrase "in the case of cultural landscapes, their distinctive character and components," to reflect the presence of people living in such landscapes. The definition of cultural landscapes helped bridge the gap between culture and nature. 2 years later, as part of an effort to expand the concept of outstanding universal value, the Global Strategies document of 1994 shifted towards an anthropological perspective that sought to express cultural exchange and human experience. Further important developments were the Convention for the Safeguarding of Intangible Cultural Heritage of 2003 and the Convention on the Protection and Promotion of the Diversity of Cultural Expressions in 2005. A critique remains by scholar Genevieve Susimel that cultural heritage representing people's movements needs to be more thoroughly considered. This includes, but is not limited to, migration, work migration, slave trade, human trafficking, and ethnic cleansing. As Susimel notes, North America in particular is important for migration studies. I would argue that these migrations are deeply connected to non-human environmental factors, as they have long been an impetus for movement, settlement, and displacement. In a previous project, I connected the natural heritage of Wood Buffalo National Park, Canadian Rocky Mountain Parks, Waterton Glacier International Peace Park, and Yellowstone with the cultural sites of Head Smash and Buffalo Jump and Writing on Stone, Aisai Nahipi through bison. Today, the near extinction of bison isolates and dramatically reconceptualizes both the cultural and historical context of these sites. Where once there was a deeply entangled cloud of relations, there is now only a series of discrete nodes, exemplars of a once connected landscape. What is important to acknowledge is that the forces, oh, sorry. What is important to acknowledge is that the forces of animal migration are no longer present. Standing on the bluff that was once one of many buffalo jumps in the region, one looks across not a vast prairie landscape, but a collection of farms, oil infrastructure, and the sporadic urban development that makes up the contemporary small town morphology of southern Alberta. In considering this new project, the fish, whales, and timber that brought Vikings and later Basque peoples to Canada's east coast is also all but depleted. This makes the underlying contextual purpose of these sites difficult to comprehend and further isolates these places from the larger roots, environmental forces, and relations that link history to land, land to people, and people to each other. L'Anse-aux-Meadows National Historic Site is unique as the only Viking settlement known in North America. In Canada, it is an anomaly, but forms part of other protected Viking sites across Greenland, Iceland, and Scandinavia. The Red Bay Basque Whaling Station is one of many known whaling stations at the mouth of the St. Lawrence River. Red Bay, however, is the most comprehensive and best preserved. While part of a much larger infrastructural system, it is the only protected Basque whaling station. Through the incessant categorization of Viking and Basque, we forgo any further relationality between varied people, the transfer of ideas, the role of other than human processes, and animal migrations. With so much missing, with so much in the distant past, and with no ongoing community to bring these histories to the present, what remains imperative is to tease open the finite enclosures that define these sites, to erode their boundaries, and to keep the sites open to natural history as much as to cultural history. As a result, my research creation work aims to expand our understanding of heritage sites by making visible the relations that historically tie them together to wider natural and cultural structures, structures which may bear resemblance to other historic or even present-day events. Problematize the boundary that territorializes heritage as an exclusive inside-outside spatial condition. To look to spaces between sites of heritage and to spatially and temporally blur where heritage starts and where it ends, and the natural and cultural forces that shape its condition. And to deploy hybrid alternative cartographic technologies and techniques to engage a rich visual practice that layers varied scales and data points in search for latent connections that might otherwise remain hidden. I should note, this visual work is not a form of storytelling or parafiction. It is very much linked to specific geographical and historical information. I must contend, however, that this record is fragmented and that these gaps offer exciting opportunities for further open-ended interpretation. This openness to interpretation of history is inspired by the writing of Jorge Otero Pelos. In his article, The Contemporary Stamp of Incompleteness, Otero Pelos wrote that the old is always open for interpretation and that this interpretation cannot finish. I'm using this theoretical frame as a lens to articulate the resultant mini-narratives and lay bare the gradient between presences and absences of the site. This is not an attempt to arbitrarily fill the gaps, but an opportunity to overlay the multiple presences in an effort to establish a relational interpretation of both place and time. To develop this ongoing work, I used document and content analysis with my established research creation practice. This practice aims to use cartographic and architectural means to visually layer time and place. While they attempt to draw the sites and events in novel ways, they remain critically anchored to convention. The focus of these cartographs is to overlay multiplicities, three-dimensionalize vectors, and open the latent temporal and spatial places, practices, and migrations that typically fall to the periphery of established heritage characteristics. To position this visual practice, I start with Christy Cheremy, both spatial and temporal argument that landscapes have the capacity to absorb remarkable amounts of residue from complicated forms of imagination. Landscapes are reservoirs of both evidence and erasure, of growth and decay, of calcification and emergent potential. Landscapes archive and are archives of change. Coded into geological strata and ecological vibrancy of any landscape are traces of both stories that have long since unfolded and others still unfolding. Jeremy argues that this is not just a question of the past, but a speculative projection of many futures. Here, I note that generally the limitation of cartography is that maps read as a surface or a cross-section. My hope is that a visual procedure that is both geographical and simultaneously archaeological may stitch the warp and weft of natural processes and cultural practices into a more comprehensive fabric. This is an amalgamation of map, diagram, and timeline, with the aim that the confluence of these varied modes of representation might tease out an enriched understanding of many places through many durations of time. How these scales of space and time are recorded remains fraught. Gilles Dissimini points out that maps are inherently distorted due to the lag of time between recording and publication, and because they collect many sources of data which they collate and present as a uniform whole. In my work, the very distortions are retained for opening up the work for interpretation in which the mini-narratives can pool and dissipate, in which the presence and absence offer opportunities for further elaboration and study. These interpretations give weight to sites of heritage and how they might exploit similar material, intellectual, and environmental means. In the case of L'Anse-aux-Meadows National Historic Site and Red Bay Basque Whaling Station, how the wealth of natural resources brought both Viking and later Basque peoples to the shores of so-called Canada, but that these people were not isolated. During their time of settlement, they brought knowledge and experience from distant places and interacted through trade and conflict with existing communities. Part of this work falls under the umbrella of worlding. A primary difficulty of this worlding is finding the right balance. On the one hand, it counters modernity in its drive to reproduce activity to its most universal, hegemonic, institutional desire to categorize, catalog, and exploit everything and rope the natural and cultural world into separate spheres of neoliberal late capitalism. On the other hand, it counters postmodernity and its determination to dismantle this hegemony and atomize all relations, bifurcating multiplicities with more multiplicities until they are concentrated to their most intersectional specificity, problematizing any overarching narrative or common thread. This plays out in relation to issues of scale and intent. At one end, there are again the rigid institutional scales that broadly define the consciously established political bodies of the nation-state, region, urban conglomerations, neighborhood, home, in discrete units of time and territories of space. But this is overlaid with actions and objects, some of which are fleeting or by chance, others willfully defying categorization or slipping between scales or shifting through space and across time. Here, heritage of Viking settlements in North America may be based on the whims of wind or the underlying currents of our oceans. It is a confluence of topography, currents, and chance that brings people, things, and ideas to new shores. I therefore describe both the physical space of the site and the resultant map of their relations as a commons. The commons offers an important conceptual premise, which is explored on multiple fronts. Firstly, it is a space in which multiple disciplines can come together to explore a set of relations. Secondly, a common is an ethic or method, a set of practices that allows this project to expand beyond L'Anse-aux-Meadows and Red Bay to explore its relations to other sites and agents. And thirdly, it is a place where I individually might share, intellectually borrow, and give back. Therefore, the articulation of heritage as a commons undermines the enclosure of current heritage practices. This is not an aim to universalize the human experience, it is very much the opposite. It sees heritage sites as places of contestation that continually strive for compromise. It further elaborates on Attilo Palus's notion of openness for interpretation. It aims to share power and represent an expanded field, including the other than human, to implicate those that otherwise have little agency and therefore little history. My focus on the commons is not so much about questions of capitalist labor, although they are implicated, My interest is about using visual methods to represent an expanded and shared community, one that acknowledges and accepts the multiplicities of time and space, but seeks to reconfigure sites of heritage not through unique difference, but through shared systems and flows. Flows of people, geology, climate, plants, animals, and ideas. In the case of Red Bay, it is a site of incredible colonial exploitation and environmental carnage. This form of visual making does not aim to strip and sanitize, to forgive, or to let back into the fold, but aims for an honesty and understands the rampant misuse of our environmental systems as pre-industrial and an ongoing legacy of our so-called progress. And heritage stretches even further back into deep time to define today with our plural humanities. Thank you very much for listening.